This is sudden, but you're fired. Mr. Smith suddenly dropped that bombshell. What? I couldn't help but blurt out an awkward response. But anyone would react like that if they were suddenly told they were being fired without any warning. I've been thinking about it for a while now, and I think it's best for you to leave. Mr. Smith continued. I was shocked and couldn't help but raise my voice. Mr. Smith. Firing me out of nowhere. I can't accept this. I've worked hard for the company since the day I joined. Sure, I've made my share of mistakes, but I don't recall doing anything that would warrant getting fired. Please, tell me what I did wrong. Mr. Smith looked at me, stunned by my outburst, before giving me a calm reply. All right. Let me explain. Just then, I heard the sound of a door, which had been closed, open with a click. I turned around to see a familiar face standing there. I've been waiting. Thank you for yesterday. The man who smiled at me was the elderly gentleman whose luggage I had rushed to deliver at the airport yesterday. I'm Michael. I work for a processed food company called Smith Foods as a 40-year-old employee. At this age, many people are in managerial positions, but I'm still a regular employee. In my personal life, I'm single and currently without a girlfriend. My boss, Greg, is a year older than me and holds the position of assistant manager. In addition, he's married. Because of that, he often looks down on me, which can be pretty annoying. Greg, could you take a look at this document? The other day, I overheard my junior colleague, Tom, talking to Greg. Oh, no, I can't. I've got a meeting to attend. Have Michael over by the window check it for you. He's single, has no girlfriend, and hasn't been promoted yet, so he should be able to handle something this simple. I overheard Greg's response. He always throws little digs like that at me. I've gotten used to it after hearing it every day, but it never feels good. Tom, my junior, seemed at a loss for how to react, so he simply said, "Got it. I'll have Michael check it," and brushed off the rude comment. He is a sharp guy who knows how to avoid unnecessary trouble, and that's how I saw him. He then came over to me and said, "Sorry, Michael. Greg told me to ask you to check this document." All right. As I was checking the materials for the business meeting, he said, "Greg's something else, huh? He always looks down on people and calls them incompetent, but isn't he the most incompetent one here?" I mentally took back what I had thought earlier. I had assumed Tom was the kind of guy who steered clear of trouble, but here he was bad-mouthing the boss. It also made me realize just how problematic Greg really was. Even someone as usually cool-headed as Tom was fed up with him, and that says a lot. I've known him for a long time, so I'm used to it by now, but yeah, it doesn't feel good. That said, Greg did praise you as a capable subordinate. So don't worry. I tried to reassure Tom. But he responded, "Being praised by him doesn't make me happy at all. If he likes you, you just end up having to listen to him badmouth other employees. No thanks. I can't wait to move to a different department." I was left speechless by my junior's sharp words. Then, the next day came. Tom and I were called by our manager, Ted. He told us, "I need you both to go on a business trip starting next week. There's an important meeting with Mr. Brown from our client in Kansai region." Last-minute business trips were nothing new, so we responded without hesitation, "Understood." Just to confirm, it'll be the two of us going on the trip, correct? Tom asked. Ted replied, "Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention Greg is going with you, too. The three of you will be going together." I could see Tom's face became disappointed. Is it because you don't trust just the two of us to handle it? Tom asked Ted. I could tell how much he didn't want to go with Greg. Ha ha. It's not that the two of you aren't reliable. But this time, Greg insisted on going. He said he wanted to meet Mr. Brown in person rather than leaving everything to his subordinates. Since we're not too busy right now, I figured it wouldn't hurt to let him tag along. Honestly, if Greg's going, I thought maybe you and Tom could handle it without me sending you along. Michael. Before Ted could even finish, Tom jumped in, almost panicking. No. Absolutely not. Michael has to come with us. It was clear how much Tom didn't want to go alone with Greg. In the end, we agreed to all three go, and on Monday, instead of heading to the office, we met directly at Haneda Airport and boarded the plane to Kansai region together. Our client was located near the Kansai airport, so we planned to take a taxi. As we were about to get in, Greg said, "All right, I'm heading to downtown for some good food. You guys handle the meeting. Call me when you're done." Tom stood there, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. As his senior, I knew I had to say something, so I spoke up to Greg. "Greg, if you're just leaving the meeting to us, there's no point in you coming with us. This is an important meeting. You should be there." Greg scoffed. "What? You're giving orders to your boss now? That's disrespectful. Besides, there was never a need for all three of us to go. You and Tom can handle it. Just give me the report later." Without waiting for our response, he turned and walked off. Can't believe. Seeing such unprofessional behavior from our boss made me feel terrible for Tom, who always worked so hard. I also regretted my own inability to stop Greg. Sorry, Tom. I couldn't stop him. But he quickly replied, No, you don't need to apologize. That's 100% on Greg. What was that? He volunteered for this trip just so he could slack off and eat his way through Kansai. Let's just forget about him and handle the meeting ourselves. Tom was clearly frustrated but determined as he looked at my phone, realizing I was about to call Greg back. He shook his head. All right. We'll let it be. Let's just nail this meeting ourselves. We went to our client's office, successfully concluded the meeting, and secured the contract. After we left, I checked my phone and saw I had a missed call from Greg. Reluctantly, I called him back. Hey, did the meeting go smoothly? I just had some amazing food in downtown. Let's meet at the airport at 4. See ya. He hung up without waiting for a reply. His voice was so loud that even Tom overheard the entire conversation. Tom was in shock again. Forget him. Let's head back ourselves and report this to Ted. We should tell him how Greg dumped the meeting on us and just went on a food tour. He looked serious, but I replied, It's not that simple. I immediately regretted my words. Was I being the voice of reason, or just a worn-down employee who had lost his way? Then 4 p.m. rolled around. It was time to meet Greg. Tom and I were waiting at the souvenir shop where Greg had said we should meet. Greg's the one who said 4 p.m., and he's still not here. Let's just go, Tom said, clearly fed up. I was starting to think he was right. Greg's selfishness was getting harder to tolerate. At that moment, an elderly man slowly approached us. Excuse me, could you tell me where I board the flight to Tokyo? An elderly gentleman slowly walked toward us, asking for help. Tokyo. You mean the flight to Haneda Airport, right? It's from the second floor. Do you know what time your flight leaves? Do you have your boarding pass with you? The elderly man, who seemed well over 70, walked slowly and was carrying a large bag by himself. Tom and I glanced at his boarding pass. Ah, the 5:30 flight. That's the same one we're on, Tom said. Yeah, it is, I confirmed. That made things easier. We quickly checked our gate and let the elderly man know. Thank you, you've been a great help, he said with a smile, bowing slightly before trudging off with his large bag. Hey, this black bag wasn't there earlier, right? I looked down and noticed a small black shoulder bag on the floor. That might be the old man's. He must have forgotten it, I said. But he left carrying a big bag, didn't he? Tom replied. I remembered clearly. The elderly man had been holding a smaller shoulder bag along with the big one. He probably planned to check the larger bag and carry the smaller one onto the plane. Oh. His wallet's probably in here. Tom unzipped the bag slightly to check inside and said, we should probably take a quick look. Before I could think twice, I grabbed the elderly man's forgotten bag and immediately started running in the direction he had gone. Michael! I heard Tom call out, and I glanced back, giving him a quick nod before turning and running again. The old man hadn't walked far, his pace was slow, so he couldn't have gotten too far yet. I figured he might stop by the luggage drop-off counter before heading to the gate. I scanned the area as I jogged, trying to spot him. When I reached the luggage counter, he wasn't there. Had he already gone to the boarding gate? Since he was on the same flight as us, maybe I could hand the bag to a flight attendant and they could get it to him. But what if his passport was in the bag? A whirlwind of thoughts ran through my mind. But I was more focused on finding him as quickly as possible than stopping to check the contents of the bag. Then, I spotted him in the distance. There he was, at the cashier of a shop, holding his large suitcase. Found him. Thanks to my good eyesight, I could recognize the old man from afar. I was sure it was him, so I sprinted toward the shop. Excuse me. Sir. You forgot your bag, I shouted at the top of my lungs. Both the old man and the cashier turned to look at me at the same time. Oh my. That's my bag. The one with my wallet in it. Thank you so much. The old man's eyes widened as he stared at the bag, then he looked at me, his eyes welling up with gratitude. I can't believe you ran all this way. You must be out of breath, he said, his voice trembling. Sir, I'm so glad we found your bag, the cashier added. It seemed the old man had realized at the cashier that his bag with the wallet was missing and had started to panic. The cashier must have been concerned as well. Thank goodness. I'm just glad I found you and got this back to you, I said, panting heavily from my sprint. You mean I dropped it where we spoke earlier? You came all the way from there to here. I can't thank you enough, he said, squinting his eyes kindly at me. At that moment, I heard Tom's voice calling out, Michael. There you are. Glad I found you. I tried calling you, but you didn't pick up, Tom said. I looked at my phone, realizing I had several missed calls from Tom. Sorry about that. I was so focused on running, I didn't even notice, I replied. Looks like you found him. I'm glad the bag made it back safely, Tom said. Suddenly, we heard a different voice behind us. Hey, what the hell are you two doing over here? This isn't a joke. It was Greg. His tone was angry, almost aggressive. "Sorry, I was just trying to return a bag that this gentleman's forgotten," I explained. Greg scoffed, "Huh? You made me wait just to return a bag to some random old guy? It's his fault for forgetting it. Why bother? But the wallet was in this bag, so we thought it was urgent to return it." Tom tried to explain. Greg sneered, "Wallet? If we found it, then we'd be the lucky ones. Heck, we could have used the cash inside. If someone loses their stuff, that's their problem." The cashier and I both cringed at Greg's words, and the air around us grew awkward. But the old man remained calm and said, "I see. I'm sorry for troubling you all while you were working. It's true that I was the one who dropped it, so it's my responsibility. If the bag hadn't been returned, it would have been my own fault. I'm just lucky that it was returned to me thanks to your kindness." "I'm very grateful," he said, shaking my hands firmly and then bowing to both Tom and Greg. The old man then opened his wallet and pulled out 3 $100 bills, handing one to each of us. "This is a small token of my appreciation. Please accept it." Tom and I were stunned. "Wait. No, no, no. We can't accept this. We only chased after you because we noticed you'd forgotten your bag." I stammered, trying to give the money back. "Please, take it. I feel bad that you had to run so much for my sake," the old man insisted. "No, really, it's no big deal. I used to be in the track and field team back in school. Running like that is nothing for me," I said, trying to be humble. But Greg just said, "Why are you guys hesitating? Come on. He wants to give it to us, so let's just take the money." Tom gave Greg a look of disbelief, as if to say, "You didn't do anything, did you?" Knowing Tom, I was nervous he might actually blurt that out. "Well, just take it," the old man said kindly. Then Greg chimed in, "Michael. Tom. If you guys won't take it, I'll just keep all $300 for myself." Panicking, Tom and I quickly stuffed the $100 bills into our wallets. I'll never forget the look of exasperation on Tom's face. The old man gave us a final bow and headed off to the boarding gate. Afterwards, Tom and I grabbed a quick bite before heading to the gate and boarding the plane. We didn't see the old man again, as his seat was far from ours. When we landed at Haneda Airport and wrapped up the business trip, we didn't stop by the office but instead contacted Ted and went straight home. The next day, as usual, I arrived at work and started writing the trip report and filling out my expense claims. Then, to my surprise, Mr. Smith walked into our department's office. "Michael, I need a word with you," he said abruptly, making me panic a little. Yes, sir." I stammered a reply and followed Mr. Smith as he led me to his office. "Excuse me." I bowed slightly as I entered, and Mr. Smith said, "Have a seat," so I sat down as instructed. I had no idea what this was about, but then he said, out of nowhere, "It's been decided, you're fired." "What?" I couldn't help but respond rudely in my shock. But who wouldn't react that way when suddenly told they were being let go for no apparent reason? I've been thinking about it for a while, and in the end, I believe it's best that you leave, he said, almost piling on the pressure. Unable to hold back, I raised my voice. "Mr. Smith, you can't just fire me like this. I've worked hard for this company ever since I joined. Sure, I may have made mistakes, but I've never done anything that would get me fired. Please, tell me what I did wrong." Mr. Smith looked momentarily stunned by my outburst, then calmly responded, "All right, all right. Let me explain." Just then, the door to the office, which had been closed, clicked open. I turned around to see a familiar face. "I've been waiting for you." "Thank you for yesterday," smiled the elderly man I had chased after at the airport to return his bag the day before. "You're..." Before I could say more, the old man spoke again. "You really helped me yesterday. I'd become forgetful in my old age, and losing my wallet could have been a disaster, my ID, credit cards. All of it could have been misused. I'm so grateful you ran after me to return it." "Oh, it was nothing, but..." I began, then continued. "What does this have to do with me getting fired?" "Mr. Smith?" I asked, turning back to Mr. Smith. He then explained what had happened 30 minutes earlier. Before I was called into the office, another person had visited this room. That person was Greg. Mr. Smith had called Greg in earlier that morning and had a conversation with him in the office before speaking to me. He told me that during their discussion, he said this to Greg: "Greg, today will be your last day. You're being let go." So it wasn't me who was being fired, it was Greg. "What? What are you talking about, Mr. Smith? I'm the assistant manager. You can't fire me, can you?" That's what Greg had said, apparently. "Don't worry. No one will miss you when you're gone. In fact, the company will run better without you. So, please, feel free to resign," Mr. Smith had replied. And right at that moment, when I entered the office, Greg said this. The elderly man, Mr. George Smith, took over from Mr. Smith and continued recounting the events from 30 minutes earlier. When I arrived here, Greg was startled and said, "What's the old man from the airport doing here?" That's when Mr. Smith replied, "Still as rude as ever, huh? This man is my father." Greg's face turned pale instantly. I was shocked to hear this. "You're Mr. Smith's father?" I had no idea. "I'm terribly sorry for any disrespect." I quickly bowed deeply to George. But George smiled kindly and said, No, you've done nothing wrong. In fact, I should be the one thanking you. I apologize for not introducing myself earlier. My name is George Smith, father of Mr. David Smith here, the CEO. I live in Kansai region. But I came to Tokyo yesterday to visit my son. Usually, I take the train, but I thought I'd fly for a change. So I took a plane from Kansai Airport for the first time. In the rush, I forgot my bag and ended up troubling you." George paused, reflecting on the conversation between Greg and Mr. Smith earlier. "So, when Greg said those rude things to me, my son, David, responded, I heard everything from my father about yesterday. Not only did you call him an old man at the airport, but you also complained to Michael, who went out of his way to return the forgotten bag. And this morning, I spoke to Tom, who told me that during yesterday's business trip, you left the negotiation to Michael and Tom while you went on a personal food tour. You took a company-paid trip and ditched work for sightseeing. You, of all people, should know how unacceptable that is. Your travel expense claim from this morning is invalid, but more importantly, I've been considering disciplinary action for some time now due to your poor attitude and lack of responsibility. This incident is the final straw. You're fired. Pack up your things and leave." Just as George finished speaking, a shadow appeared at the office door. It was Greg, the man in question. "Shh. What are you doing in the CEO's office, Michael? I didn't even want to see your face." Greg, no longer the assistant manager, sneered as soon as he saw me. "Greg, have you finished packing? You're here to return your employee ID, right?" "Let's get it over with," Mr. Smith said firmly. Greg marched over to Mr. Smith's desk, scowling, and handed over his ID with a sour expression. At that moment, another figure appeared at the door. It was Tom. "Excuse me. I heard Greg was here, so I came to say my goodbyes." "Thank you for everything," Tom said in a flat, matter-of-fact tone. "What the hell, Tom? Was it you who ratted me out to Mr. Smith?" "Thanks to you, I've lost my job. You owe me a month's pay for getting me fired," Greg shouted at Tom. I instinctively stepped in to protect Tom, saying, "You're wrong, Greg. It wasn't Tom who reported it to Mr. Smith, it was me." I took the blame willingly. But then Tom spoke up, "Thank you, Michael, for trying to protect me. But it's okay. I didn't do anything wrong. Letting someone like him continue unchecked wouldn't help anyone." Tom's voice was firm. "Enough, Greg," Mr. Smith said, exasperated. "This isn't about who reported it. You violated company policy. And it was any employee's duty to report what they saw. That's all there is to it." At that moment, George, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "I've lived longer than all of you, and I've seen many kinds of people. In moments of urgency, a person's true nature is revealed. Yesterday, at the airport, Michael ran without hesitation to return my forgotten bag. Tom, noticing this, became concerned and went looking for him. But Greg, instead of appreciating their actions, complained that they didn't prioritize him as their superior. And when I offered a small token of thanks, Greg tried to take not only his share but also that of his subordinates who were too polite to accept. That's what it comes down to. All living beings look out for themselves, but as humans, we have the ability to act with reason. The question is whether we can set aside our own interests and care for others. That's the wisdom that allows us to live fulfilling lives. Greg, it's not too late for you to reflect and change your ways. I hope you take this chance to start anew." George's words, filled with the wisdom of age, deeply resonated with me. I hoped that even a little of it would reach Greg's heart as well. He still looked displeased, but he didn't argue and remained silent, listening. "Greg, if you truly reflect on your actions and want to start over, I can't promise you your job back, but feel free to come to me for advice," Mr. Smith said, before suddenly turning to me. "And Michael," he called my name unexpectedly, making me panic. "Yes, sir," I replied, startled. Mr. Smith smiled and said, "As of today, you're the new assistant manager. Congratulations. You'll also be receiving a raise. So keep up the good work." And then, looking at Tom, he called his name, "Tom." "Yes," Tom replied calmly. "Support Michael as his right hand. Take care of the junior employees. You're getting a raise too. I trust in your skills and leadership," Mr. Smith said. Even Tom, usually composed, broke into a smile and replied happily, "Thank you. I'll do my best." "What? Why are they getting promotions and raises? This is ridiculous," Greg shouted. But George, with a calm authority, said, "Think carefully about your actions." After a moment of silence, Greg's expression softened into one of regret. "I understand. I'll reflect on whether my past behavior was right or wrong," he muttered in a quiet voice. Mr. Smith and George had been strict with Greg, but their approach also held kindness meant to encourage growth. If even a fraction of their words reached Greg, it would be a success. With slumped shoulders, Greg left the office. Watching him leave, I thought to myself, I still have so much to learn as a person. I need to give my all to this new role that Mr. Smith has entrusted to me. A year has passed since that day. I was attending a memorial service with my wife for Mr. George Smith's passing, marking the 49th day since his death. A lot has happened in the past 6 months. I was promoted from assistant manager to manager, gaining Mr. Smith's full recognition and deepening our trust. One day, Mr. Smith's daughter, Emily, came to help out at the company. I was asked by Mr. Smith to teach her some of the administrative tasks. While working together, Emily invited me out to dinner. As we grew closer, word of our relationship reached Mr. Smith, and he said, "I trust Michael, so how about my daughter?" With Mr. Smith's blessing, Emily and I began dating, and 6 months ago, we happily tied the knot. Unfortunately, George's health worsened, and he passed away last month. I had hoped to see him in better health again, but sadly, that wasn't meant to be. However, while he was in the hospital, he had happily shared the story about how I had run through the airport to return his bag with his visiting relatives. Who would have thought that a chance encounter at the airport would lead to us becoming family? I've learned that regardless of whether you know someone or not, showing kindness without expecting anything in return leads to a richer life. An unexpected person showed up at George's funeral after hearing about his passing. It was Greg. Word had it that after being fired from Smith Foods, he didn't find another job and spiraled into despair. Ultimately, his wife left him and they divorced. Later, he reconsidered his life choices and started working at a small company as a regular employee. Apparently, Greg had reached out to Mr. Smith for advice, and Mr. Smith had introduced him to a company run by one of his acquaintances. Greg said that the words George had spoken to him on the day he was fired had stayed with him. He had been planning to express his gratitude when he heard the news of George's passing. So here he was, paying his respects. George had once said, "The ability to put others before yourself, that's the wisdom that leads to a fulfilling life." Greg, reflect on this. It's not too late to turn things around. Even if those words didn't resonate at the time, they eventually sank into one's heart. He had come to realize his mistakes and had fully changed his ways. I can't claim to have the power to change someone, but I hope to live with humility and sincerity, influencing those around me positively. Just like George did. Grandpa always loved and appreciated you, right up until the end. Emily said, her eyes filled with tears as she offered incense. "Yeah, I'm truly grateful we met," I replied, smiling gently at her. Standing before the memorial tablet, I clasped my hands together and made a silent vow. "I will make your granddaughter, Emily, happy."